So, we got some new things that have dropped. We have a new trailer for Stranger of Paradise Final Fantasy Origin, and on top of that, we also have some interviews with Jin Fujiwara, Daisuke Inoue, who are both from Square Enix, and then Fumihiko Yasuda, who is from Team Ninja, who are working on the game along with Square Enix. So there's quite a bit of stuff to break down. I'm not going to go into massive in-depth detail and like examine every single frame, because a lot of the frames aren't that interesting. But the interesting things we're definitely going to pull out. And then towards the end, I think we'll do a little bit of speculation as to where this story could be going, because there are a few interesting possibilities. Please drop a like on the video, it massively helps the channel, and also consider subscribing if you've been here a few times, or if it's your first time and you like what you see. But, let's get on with it. So, for the first few scenes of this trailer, what we can see is we can see what seems to be chaos. I assume it's Garland, Jack Garland, just based on a few things. And he seems to be kidnapping someone. I assume it's going to be Sarah. And this kind of leads into... I'm going to guess this leads into the start of Final Fantasy I's actual story. It seems like this could be a scene that we see early on in the game, because they're showing it straight away at the start of the trailer. And there is a scene that Nomura talks about in a previous interview from around October last year, where he speaks about a scene that we see at the start of the game, and then we see it again later on in the game. I think that is this scene. And yeah, we see this character fighting the way out. The reason why I kind of feel like it's Jack is because of this kind of crystallized stuff that's all over everyone. When we see Jack do like his absorption kind of attack, this is the motif that it takes, this is what it looks like. So it kind of makes sense that this is actually Jack, but we're not 100% on that. I feel like it is though. Let's carry on. So we've got the full party here. I'm not too sure who the additional character is. I'm sure we'll learn more as time goes on. And we see a few scenes with Sarah and with Jack, and they're obviously at Cornelia and talking about things. So yeah, nothing major there. Or at least I don't think there was anything major there. And now we come to this guy. Now this, I believe, is Astos from Final Fantasy I, who's like an evil elf king, and he steals Matoya's crystal. And that leads to one of the side missions, well, one of the early missions that you have to do in Final Fantasy I. After that, we get a few combat shots. You know, we see some old classics like Marlborough, Tombury, Behemoth, things like that. And we keep hearing lines along the lines of attachments to this world will make it difficult to do our duty and all that sort of thing. I'll come round to that eventually. Yeah, we'll discuss that. Because we do have confirmation from one of these interviews, which we'll also cover shortly, that this is not an isekai. It is not an isekai. This is legit what is going on, so we need to explore possibilities for that, and I've got a pretty simple answer for it, if I'm being completely honest with you, but we'll get there. Also, it seems to be indicated that they have no memory of their previous lives, potentially, or their past. Not too sure what the details with that's going to be. We'll have to look into that a bit more. But yeah, I think it all ties in. And then we get some shots of some of the fiends. So from what I can tell, the first one that we've got here is Tiamat. Now this scene, I'm not too sure about this. This could potentially be Bahamut, because you do meet Bahamut in Final Fantasy I. He gives you the ability, you know, he upgrades your job classes in Final Fantasy I. So it is possible that this is Bahamut, especially given that I think we've just seen Tiamat. And it very much fits the design of Tiamat, multiple heads, you know, more like a Hydra kind of situation. So yeah, I'm going to guess that this that we've got on screen now, this one's Bahamut, which tells me that there's going to be some kind of interactions with Bahamut. Again, that could tie into what I believe is going on with Jack. We'll get into that in a second. We then see the water fiend Kraken, who's living in the Sunken Shrine. So we are getting through all of the fiends from the original game. Just like when we see Tiamat's in the Flying Fortress, so they're in the same locations that we were, and we'll come to the Flying Fortress very soon. Then after the Kraken, we've got Marilith, who's the Fiend of Fire, and then I'm pretty solidly convinced that this is the Lich, the final one, and the Lich is the Earth Fiend, which is at the Terror Cavern. So yeah, we've got all of the Fiends, we've got Astos. It's almost starting to feel like Final Fantasy VII Remake, to a certain degree. And then we get quite an interesting little scene with I'm not too sure what's going on here, but Jack's holding like a black egg sort of thing, and it looks like it's being handed over to him, but I can't tell who that is that's handing it over to him. Maybe we get another shot a little bit later into the trailer. Let's keep an eye on it. Oh, and then we see him giving this little chaos egg to Sarah. Interesting. Then we get a scene with Chaos kind of goading Jack, saying, "We're almost there, Jack, just a little further, the end is nigh." So it seems like this is a scene from when Jack's kind of crumbling a little bit and Chaos is going to take over. And then in the next scene, we see the little Chaos egg that Jack had given to Sarah or whatever it was. We see her dying and drop that and smash it. So yeah, it's quite interesting how this is going to pan out. It's a bit weird. I have some thoughts, but give it a minute. Then we get into the weird Frank Sinatra fever dream section of the video, and yeah, I have no idea what's going on at this point. So basically what we get here is we get numerous scenes of people saying, "Oh, Jack, you need to do this. Oh, it's good that we forget, isn't it, Jack? Oh, yes, Jack, Jack, Jack." But literally it's just him walking through a field listening to Frank Sinatra on his iPhone. I have no clue what's going on right now. So yeah, we're just gonna roll with it. We're just gonna keep going. Okay, and then we get a fist bump with Astos. What is this fever dream of a trailer? We get the revelation that Sarah loves Jack. Amazing. And then obviously we get the iconic scene with the 4 main party members looking over Cornelia, crossing the bridge. You know the scene. If you've played Final Fantasy 1, you know the scene. You know the scene. And it looks stunning. I'm not going to lie. It looks absolutely stunning. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Let's finish this. And then we get that shot of Jack sitting down in the chair at the end. That does not, that kind of gives me vibes that Jackie Boy has finally turned. Okay, so that's the end of the trailer. Like I say, the bulk of it is just mindless chatter for the most part. Like, oh Jack, hello Jack, how's it going, Jack? But there are a few interesting tidbits of information that we can get from this. So first off, we've got like the recurrence of all of the fiends from what I can see from Final Fantasy 1. You've got Maralith, you've got Lich, you've got Tiamat, and you've got Kraken. They all appear. They all seem to appear in their usual locations as well. So like the Fire Cavern and all that sort of business. Tiamat appearing on the Floating Fortress. Now, the Floating Fortress is something that we need to get into. And I've been calling it the Floating Fortress. It's the Flying Fortress, the Sky Castle, the Floating Castle, whatever you want to call it. But really, the Flying Fortress originally was home to the Luthenian race. Now, the Luthenians were massively advanced civilization who had technology, and this is where I kind of feel like the secretiveness with Jack could kind of come to a head. So Jack is said to not be of this world when he's referring to, when he's speaking to Sarah, and when he's in Cornelia, basically. I think that comes from the fact that they are part of this Luthenian race. So I feel like Garland and the rest of the characters, and that Sophia that we bump into as well, she seems like she's Luthenian. That's why they've got this modern attire. That's why they've got technology. Do you know what I mean? And we definitely go there because we fight Tiamat, and it looks... you see scenes with, I believe it's the Sophia character, where she's in like a street that looks like a modern day street. But when you get to the more technological looking places where it's all moving platforms and electronics, that is 100% undoubtedly Luthenia. And the Flying Fortress, the Floating Fortress, whatever you want to call it. So this kind of hints to me that Jack and the rest of the gang, I don't know how it's going to work, because I mean, the Luthenian race is like 400 years prior to the events of Final Fantasy 1 and Cornelia. So, I don't know, maybe they were in some sort of stasis or something like that, and they've just randomly, woken up. Maybe there was a purpose to it, maybe they were purposefully put into stasis and they've only just woken up. Maybe there has been some sort of time break, because Final Fantasy 1 is a game that definitely gets involved with time loops. In Final Fantasy 1, the main premise of it is that Chaos, Garland, has created a time loop. So when you go and defeat him at the start of the game and rescue Princess Sarah, it creates a time loop. And the 4 fiends send Chaos back in time so that he can't be killed, basically. It's a weird premise, but it's definitely feeling like something they're going to be leaning on quite heavily in Final Fantasy Origins, Stranger of Paradise. The question is this just Final Fantasy 1 reimagined in an action setting? I don't think it is. The fact that we've got Jack kind of tells me that it is a prequel. But then the question becomes, how much of a prequel is it? And there are 2 realistic estimations. The first one is that it's a very recent prequel, like pretty much immediately before Final Fantasy 1. So the events of Stranger of Paradise happen, and then Final Fantasy 1 begins. That's one thing it's starting to look like to me. Another possibility, though, is that maybe it's set a few hundred years before, maybe, because like I say, we've got 400 years between Lufenia and where we're at the start of Final Fantasy 1. There is a possibility that it's set a few hundred years before. I don't think that is the case, because in the original Final Fantasy, we learn Garland, who is the main antagonist of that first game, he is a former Knight of Cornelia who has fallen from grace, and then the Warriors of Light go after him after learning that he has kidnapped Princess Sarah. So that very much makes me think that this is happening in the very immediate future of Final Fantasy 1. It is literally the events of Stranger of Paradise straight into the events of Final Fantasy 1. It makes sense that Jack and the others, because like I say, we have had it confirmed, and it is pretty much the only point of interest really in these interviews, the confirmation that this is not an isekai. So yeah, I'll flash it up on screen now. Basically, the indication is that the game is hinting to people that it is an isekai, that these people have come from another world. They do say it over and over again, but Jin Fujiwara, the producer, says it is not meant to be like an isekai. We understand that people may have seen the protagonist's outfit, which seems very modern compared to high fantasy, and may have had that interpretation. So yeah, isekai out the window. It is definitely not a real world person who's been dragged into a fantasy or anything like that. So then you've got to wonder, what are the characters talking about when they're saying, like, this isn't my world? And I think that boils down to them being Lufenians. I think that is going to be the straight up facts of it. They are Lufenians. They are like some holdover from the Lufenian race. And if we look into the Lufenians, we do see Lufenians in Final Fantasy 1. There is a little town, there's a group of people called Lufenians who speak a different language. You have to get the Rosetta Stone in order to be able to speak to them. But originally they had this floating castle high up in the sky, and 400 years ago, the Sky People, which is the origin race of the Lufenians, they lived high up in the sky in this floating castle with a tower called the Mirage Tower, which was the entry into, the floating castle. They had a massively advanced level of technology. They were creating mechanical beings, they were creating airships and things like that. But then, one day, the Fiend of Wind, Tiamat, appeared and overtook the castle, banishing the Sky People out of the castle. And that was it. The Sky People were weakened, they lost a lot of the technological prowess. And in an interesting twist, which could explain a lot, the Lufenians, before the events of Final Fantasy I, sent out 5 heroes to investigate of another force potentially controlling Tiamat. What was the cause behind Tiamat doing what it did? Because it hadn't done it previously, so why now? None of these warriors returned. 5 of them. And I have speculated that, Jack and the rest of the party, they could be Lufenian. These 5 warriors, none of them returned. As of the latest trailer, we see 5 members of the party, once you include Sophia into that group. Things are starting to line up pretty nicely. And when you reach the Chaos Shrine, you do find 5 bats circling around a black crystal. And I don't know if this is meant to be like a little, yeah, that's them, potentially. I'm not too sure on that front. I think it's meant to nod, it's meant to hint towards that when you find this story about the 5 heroes from Lufenia. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting information there. As far as the interviews go, there's not that much more interesting information from any of them, if I'm being completely honest with you. I mean, we learn about the influence of the Neo game on it and things like that. We learn about the introduction of story mode, so that if you're not massively into these kind of action RPG games, you are still going to be able to get through it and appreciate the story of the game. We learn about the jobs as well, and we find out that there is a total of 27 jobs altogether. We had a few revealed in this trailer. I think Samurai was revealed along with a couple of others. I might be wrong on that. But yeah, narrative-wise, it's looking pretty crazy. Well, yeah, there are a couple of interviews out there from what I can see. We've got one that seems to have come through Sony, and then seems to be one that's through Inverse from what I can see. And the Inverse one is the one where we find out that it isn't an isekai. That's where we get that confirmation that this game is not an isekai. As far as the rest of that interview goes, one question: what were some of the challenges and opportunities of retelling the story of Final Fantasy? And in a way, he says that Stranger of Paradise is not a one-for-one retelling, but more like a different interpretation of what could have happened in the story of Final Fantasy 1. So that's quite interesting. I don't know what the suggestion is there. Is this possibly like the suggestion that this is going to be, something changes? So my assumption is these 5 warriors, they get sent from Luthenia, they go wandering around for a bit, they kind of forget who they are. Maybe the Luthenians use magic on them to make them forget who they are, but just remember that they've got this mission. I'm not too sure. There's a lot of possibilities going on with this. But the fact that they're saying that it's not a one-for-one retelling, but more likely a different interpretation, it definitely gives real strong Final Fantasy VII Remake vibes. And we all know how that went. Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a remake, it's a sequel. Fight me about it. But yeah, we know how that went. So them saying that it's a retelling of Final Fantasy 1, I'm not 100% convinced by that. I kind of feel like it is still fitting into prequel territory, but who knows? We need to experience the story and see what goes on with it. I do think that some of these things do link up quite well with Final Fantasy 1. I mean, obviously we've got all the Fiends, we've got Astos, we've got Garland, we've got Cornelia, we've got Sarah, we've got all that sort of business. But it is more and more, as time goes on, seeming like it's a direct prequel to Final Fantasy 1. But they keep saying it's a retelling, so we need to see how this pans out, see what kind of route the story takes. I'm pretty solidly stuck on it being a prequel, a direct prequel for Final Fantasy 1. I'm going to say that Jack and the others are Luthenians, they've lost their memories somehow, whether intentional or otherwise, and they've ended up in Cornelia, and the story proceeds from there. That's what I guess, that's what I'm expecting, and by the end of the story, I'm going to assume that Jack still goes down the same road that he goes down and becomes Chaos. Everything in the trailer seems to be indicating that, although it would not shock me if Square threw a twist at us. It genuinely would not shock me if they threw a twist at us and it was like, oh no, he's not gone the Chaos route, you're actually going to win, or something like that. I don't know, we'll see how that pans out. It's definitely feeling, like I say, to me, it's feeling like it's going to be a direct prequel to Final Fantasy 1, and it's going to set up, and it's probably going to end with Garland turning into Chaos, everyone forgetting about him because that is something that we keep on hearing, and at the end of Final Fantasy 1, no one remembers what you've done. So you save the world, but because you've corrected the timeline, the events never happened, and therefore no one remembers the heroic acts that you displayed, and the heroic feats that you put into place. So yeah, it's weird. It's a remake and it's not. It's Final Fantasy VII Remake all over again. I don't know what's going on, but we're going to cover it. It's coming out soon. We've got like 2 months until it drops, so I'm 100% going to be picking it up and checking it out, because I kind of need to know where they're going with this, if I'm being completely honest. Let me know what you think. What do you think about this trailer? Was there anything that I missed? Is there anything in the interview that I missed? I'll leave links to everything in the description and things like that. But yeah, let me know what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for future content. But more importantly than anything, have a great day.